Alright, let's talk about risk register example. I will show you a template that I used on real projects, and I will show you an example how to fill in this template with real life examples of risks. And in the end I will explain you several tips on how to make this risk register useful for your project. So let's dive in. But first of all, let's be clear that risk register and risk log are the same things. It's one document, just different names. Also, the format of the spreadsheet is not set in stone. I'll give you an example in just a second, but do keep in mind that you need to adapt it to the needs of your unique project. So not all the entries in this risk register that I will show you are applicable to your industry or to your project specifically. Alright, here's the first example. Let's take a look at it. Risk ID 0001. Risk title. Web application depends on the design created by the external design team. Risk description. Alpha Designs, that's the name of the company, creates web UI and UX designs for all our projects. However, they are the shared resource for the whole company. We need to get their commitment beforehand to ensure timely delivery. Also, we need to keep creative process within allocated time. Effect. Delays in the design delivery will directly impact the project schedule. VBS element 1.3 the web application. As this design is on the critical path, we think that one of the major deliverables is at risk. Category, if you use them, I put here vendors. Probability. Probability is low because we know about this problem and we encountered it before, so we can set either low or free if you use a range from 1 to 10. Impact is high, and that's because it directly impacts the schedule of the projects. So every day of delay in delivering these designs will delay the start of the development process. Owner, the project manager, Dmitry Nezhebetsky. Risk response plan. Procurement manager should include the following terms in the contract: weekly reports, weekly on-site meetings, delivery via collaboration system, for example InVision. And status is new because we're just starting out. Alright, right now I will give you another example and then I will explain all the columns, all the entities in this example one by one. And by the way, I have a separate article with examples of risk responses and risks that I had on real projects. They're different in different areas and in different scale. So I do recommend you to read this article after you watch this video. Okay, now let's review the second example. Okay, risk ID here is 0005. Title: critical person may leave company. Description: only one engineer in the company has required skills to deliver the work package. He is currently in conflict with functional manager. There is a good chance that he will leave the company. Effect of this risk is that delivery will be fully blocked. VBS element 1.2 mobile application. Category, it's human resources, so HR here. So probability 6, impact 10. So if you use grades from 1 to 10 for qualitative risk analysis, you can also derive the risk rank. Risk rank here is 60. I'll explain it in a minute. Owners are the HR department and specifically Lee and Remington. So our risk response plan here is to request HR department to open new vacancy. Request HR to find an outsourcing or freelancing option if we can't get a new resource, a new person to the team in time. In parallel to that, they need to work to help to resolve the conflict that this person has with the functional manager. Status is already in progress, even if it's just the planning phase of the project, but this risk is ongoing one. I don't need to wait until the implementation phase or later because this risk is already happening. Alright, these are the examples of what we actually put into the risk register. Right now I will tell you about each column separately to explain what you need to put and how you should think about it. And first of all we have a risk ID. It's a unique identifier of a risk, because when you have hundreds or thousands of risks and they have somewhat similar descriptions and titles, you do want to point out to the very specific risk. Next we have risk title, and you use this one-sentence description for high-level reference to the risk, so that you don't need to dive deep into the description or the effect. Okay, risk description. As it says, it's a description of a risk, and I do recommend you to put several sentences here so that anyone who reads the risk register can understand what this risk is about, at least at a high level. Then we have WBS element, and I do recommend you to tie all the risks to a corresponding work breakdown structure element so that you know what is impacted by this risk. And a risk can impact either activity or work package or deliverable. And if it's an overall risk, if it's a business risk, it applies to the top level item, which is your product, service or result. Then we have risk category. It's important, but it's optional. So if you have a lot of risks and you want to find the root cause or address the root cause, you need to systemize and group risks into the categories. Then you can apply one risk response plan to this group of risks and fix them all. Next we have probability and impact from qualitative risk analysis. Depending on the system that you use, you will put here either low, medium and high grades or 1 to 3 and up to 10 grades of your qualitative risk analysis. By the way, if you use qualitative risk analysis where you calculate the monetary value of a risk in dollars, then you can add additional columns to this risk register. But keep in mind that you will do the qualitative risk analysis for only selected top risks that you need to actually prioritize. It won't be that many risks, so maybe for your project it will be wise to put the qualitative risk analysis into a separate document. Okay, next we have risk rank, and you get it just by multiplying risk impact by risk probability. Again, you need to use grades from 1 to 10 to get this risk rank. And this risk rank only helps you to prioritize risk and sort them in this risk register so that you select and put the most important, the most critical risks to the top of the risk register. Alright, next we have risk effects, and do pay attention here because you won't find this in any other book on project management or on the internet, because that's something that I recommend you to do. And here you actually need to describe, you need to write out the effect, the impact of a risk on any aspect of the project that you lead. You need to spell out this information for further communication with stakeholders. You will use this description, you can actually copy and paste them into your emails with stakeholders to describe the effects of a risk. Believe me, if you do this work upfront, it will be much easier to get the buy-in from stakeholders to allocate some resource of time or money for a specific risk. And as much as possible you want to point out the business problems for your clients, like it's an impact on the budget, it's an impact on deadlines, or it's an additional scope that you didn't anticipate before. Alright, every risk should have an owner, and this owner is not only you. So you need to find someone who is more experienced, more knowledgeable in this area, who can tackle the risk better than you. Next, you need to write out the risk response plan, and here you do put the actual steps that you will take to avoid or mitigate the risk. Likewise, if you want to actively or passively accept this risk, you write it down here and you mention the amount of risk reserves in money or time that you allocate for this risk. And last but not least, you have status, and you need to track the status of the risks. I recommend you to use the following statuses as new, planned, upcoming, in progress, and done. Alright, if you found these examples useful, do give me a thumbs up for the video right now. Thank you in advance. Let's move on. First of all, I want you to understand that a risk register is just a simple document or Excel spreadsheet. There is no need in any special software application to make risk register work for your project. But you don't use the register on your own, so ideally it should be either shareable or accessible online to all the team members and stakeholders of your project. Okay, you can get this template on my site, and I will leave you a link in the description to my free library of templates and resources for project managers. Alright, now it's time to talk about some practical tips on how to use a risk register so it's useful for the project. And the main problem here is that many project managers create a risk register, they fill out the risks, they have a long list of risks that they monitor and they want to avoid or mitigate, and then at some point life happens and they don't get back to risk register for several weeks. And then when a project manager gets back to the risk register, a lot of risks have already happened, some of them disappeared, new ones appeared, and it takes a lot of efforts to bring it back to the realities of your current situation. And in fact, this problem is just a consequence of inadequate usage of the risk register. So let's talk about these common issues and how to avoid them. And the first one here is, when should you start using the risk register? Because the books on project management and courses on project management suggest that you begin to fill out the risk register in the planning phase. But I do recommend you to start using risk register as soon as you learn for the first time that you will lead a new project. Because even at this stage there are some common risks that happen, that are present in your environment, in your company, that you already know about. So you do need to have a risk register already in the initiation phase, or even better if it's just a pre-sales phase when you are just starting communicating with your clients and customers. But keep in mind that you don't need to fill all the fields at once. You don't need to enter all the information into risk register at this early stage, but you do want to capture all the risks. You can write out only the titles of the risks that appeared at the early stages of the project. Then you will use risk register as an input to all risk management activities. But what's more, in theory, the risk register is an input to almost all project management processes, for example, that PMI describes. So the key takeaway here is that you need to keep your risk register close at hand, and you need to have an ability to write down any risk that you encounter or think about at any place during meetings, interviews, or just at the daily work that you do. So if you use Google Sheets or something like that, do create a bookmark that you can just click and the risk register is right here and ready to be used. Okay, that's an ongoing identification of risks, but at some point of the project you will do the bulk work and you fill out the majority of risks there. So you will have dedicated meetings, dedicated brainstorming sessions or interviews with subject matter experts where you will write out all the risks. And here's an important thing. You need to separate identification process from the analysis process. So during identification you can only log in ID, title and description. And later, when you have the team, you have access to subject matter experts, you can fill out all the other fields. And that's important because identification process requires completely different mindset and perspective onto the risks and your project in general. After identification, you will perform qualitative risk analysis and you will identify the impact and probability of each risk. It will help you to prioritize the whole list of risks in your risk register so that you can select only the top priority ones. Because remember that risk management is not free of charge. Even identification and identification of risk response plans takes your time and the time of subject matter experts and the time of your team. You can't address all the risks. That's why your risk register should be a prioritized list, so the most severe ones should be at the top. Alright, once you know the list of risks that you will address, you need to fill out the risk response plans, you need to fill out the status and the owner of this risk. And here I also have several important tips for you from real-life project management. First of all, you don't do risk management on your own. At some point you need to start delegating specific risks to specific people on your team or to the stakeholders. Why? Because you as a project manager is an expert in risk management and project management as a process, as workflow. But you might not have all the industry-specific knowledge or technical knowledge to tackle the risk efficiently. Most of the times you are not the most suitable person to tackle the risk. Second, do keep your risk register shared with your team. You need to get engagement from your team and your risk management efforts should be transparent for the team and stakeholders. which means that you must educate your team members and stakeholders in risk management. Third, there is a point where you need to put the most efforts in risk identification and risk analysis. So at some moment you'll create the drafts of schedule, of budget, your scope, then HR plan, and so on and so on. So you will have all the subsidiary plans for your projects. So before finalizing the project management plan and showing it to the clients, you do want to show your subsidiary plans to your team and some subject matter experts, and make the brainstorming session to identify the risks based on the drafts of your plan. And here you as a project manager will identify much more risks because you will have the bigger picture of the whole project and the plan. Fourth, you need to review the risk register regularly. Create a recurring calendar event to review and revisit your risk register. So for sure review risk register when a change request comes, when you start and finish working on a deliverable. Do check it when a risk happens, when a risk response plan is inefficient, or when you successfully managed a risk. You got the point. Do check the risk register regularly. With that said, keep your risk register up to date every day. Risk management is a continuous effort. It doesn't end with project planning. Moreover, risks appear during the project lifetime. Some risks change their impact or probability or the effect, so you need to track all these during the whole project. Again, you don't need to do it all alone. All the owners can update the risk register for you. You just need to keep an eye that this process and these changes do happen. And last, you need to make risk register presentable, because risk management is more efficient when it's transparent to the clients and other stakeholders. It helps to manage their expectations, it helps to prepare them for upcoming problems and get their buy-in to help you resolve them. And if you put the efforts upfront and you will fill up all these fields like effects, impact, descriptions, probability, and so on, it will be much easier to communicate each risk to your stakeholders. By the way, this video is sponsored by my free career change cheat sheet. So if you want to become a project manager and you want to be a great project manager with great risk management skills, do check the link below and download this PDF. Alright, we all agree that risk register is important, so now it's your turn to make it useful for your project. If you want to see more videos like this, do subscribe to this channel and hit that bell button. And do check the resources below this video, because I included the risk register template for you and some more videos that dive deeper into risk management process. And if you want to become a project manager, do get the career change cheat sheet as well. See you in the next video. Thank you for watching.